Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. When you think of the greatest game that Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Terry Bradshaw ever played, odds are this game might be the first one that comes to mind, and might be the best one of his legendary Hall of Fame career. In the 1976 divisional against the Baltimore Colts, the Steelers won 40-14, and Bradshaw had the game of his life. During this dominant performance, Bradshaw went 14 for 18 with 264 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and a perfect passer rating of 158.3. It literally does not get any higher than that. On December 19, 1976, Terry Bradshaw took the football world by storm. But what you might not realize is that this performance almost never happened, because 8 days before, Bradshaw was one play away from losing his job for good. On December 11th, the Pittsburgh Steelers took on the Houston Oilers, and Terry Bradshaw was playing so poorly and looking so lethargic out there that Steelers head coach Chuck Noll had the backup warming up on the sidelines and was ready to insert him into the game to potentially save Pittsburgh's season and replace Bradshaw. And the play that changed Noll's mind and changed Bradshaw's career? Oddly enough, it had nothing whatsoever to do with Terry Bradshaw. And this is the story behind that bizarre and monumental play. Before I talk about the play in question, we need some context to understand the game, how it was going, and how both Terry Bradshaw and his backup looked heading into that game. To start off the 1976 season, it seemed like things were going fantastic for Bradshaw under center. Bradshaw's career started off fairly shaky, which I talked about in a previous video of mine, so if you want to learn more about that disastrous 1970 season of his, then click the card in the upper right corner. However, by the mid-70s, he was starting to look like the #1 pick that Pittsburgh envisioned. In 1975, he had what was undoubtedly the best year of his career at the time. For the first time in his career, he threw more touchdowns than interceptions. He guided the Steelers to a 12-2 record, completed a career-high 57.7% of his passes, and threw 18 touchdowns on just 9 interceptions. He made the Pro Bowl for the first time in his career, and finished inside the top 6 in passer rating and passing touchdowns for the first time ever. On top of that, he guided the Steelers to a victory at Super Bowl X, helping Pittsburgh win their second straight Super Bowl title. And Bradshaw was keeping that momentum going through the first 3 weeks of the 1976 season. Over those first 3 weeks, he threw 4 touchdowns and just 1 interception. As things stood, with his 80.8 passer rating, he was on pace for over 3,300 yards passing, 21 touchdowns, and just 5 interceptions. Had he kept that pace up, he would have finished the year first in passing yards and third in passing touchdowns. While it was unrealistic to necessarily expect him to keep this up, as it was only the first 3 games, and quarterbacks typically play worse as the season goes on due to poor weather, injuries, and a heavier emphasis of running the football, this just shows how good Bradshaw was to kick off that 1976 campaign. Unfortunately, once we hit October, everything fell off of a cliff for Bradshaw and company. The Steelers started the season off 1-4 through their first 5 games, and Bradshaw looked like garbage in the last 2. Against the Minnesota Vikings in Week 4, on Monday Night Football, the Steelers lost 17-6, as Bradshaw completed just 45% of his passes while throwing 1 touchdown and 4 interceptions, throwing for 90 yards, getting sacked 5 times, and posting a passer rating of 32.6, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. And against the Cleveland Browns in Week 5, the Steelers lost as Bradshaw got sacked 4 times while throwing no touchdowns and 1 interception. This season, which seemed like it was starting off promising for Bradshaw and the team coming off of the Super Bowl win, was going off the rails fast and quickly. And at least when it came to Bradshaw, it would not get much better. The good news for the Steelers was that following their 1-4 start and looking dead in the water, almost needing to run the table to even have a fighting shot at the postseason, they turned it around. Many argue that the 1976 Steelers had the greatest defense of any of the individual teams in the Steel Curtain era, and considering that they led the league by allowing just 9.9 points per game, it would be tough to argue against that. To show just how dominant the Steelers were that season, from Week 7 through Week 14, the Steelers allowed 22 points total. That's an 8-week stretch where they recorded 6 shutouts and allowed 2.75 points per game. If all you did over the course of a game was kick a field goal, you would raise Pittsburgh's scoring average. The bad news was that they were doing this turnaround without Bradshaw. Bradshaw suffered injuries to his neck and his wrist, which forced him to miss some time. Then, even though Bradshaw was healthy, Noll let Mike Kruczek start the vast majority of the games over the second half of the season, with Kruczek starting the 3 most recent games prior to the season finale against the Houston Oilers. Kruczek wasn't necessarily good, but he didn't have to be. The Steelers were 6-0 in games that he started, even though he never threw a single touchdown pass. But he never made the big mistake. Noll decided that he was going to start Bradshaw for the final game of the regular season, but considering the circumstances behind the game, it was clear that Bradshaw would have an extremely short leash. And considering the fact that Pittsburgh hadn't lost yet with Kruczek under center, and the fact that Bradshaw's passer rating since week 4 was 52.7, with a poor completion percentage of 50% and more interceptions and touchdowns, it wasn't hard to see why. With that, we head to the Houston Astrodome. It's December 11th, 1976, and the Steelers are traveling to Houston in this nationally televised Saturday AFC Central matchup. Even though the game meant nothing whatsoever to the Oilers, who were 5-8 and were guaranteed a last place finish in the division, for the Steelers, the importance of this game could not be overstated. It was one of the biggest regular season games in the history of the franchise. After a 1-4 start followed by an 8-game winning streak, the stakes were simple. Win, and you win the division and make the postseason. Lose, and your playoff hopes are essentially over. Defensive back Mel Blount said that this was the biggest game of the season, and Chuck Noll went as far as saying that it would be a crime if his team squandered this golden opportunity and remarkable turnaround. Bradshaw was back under center to try and guide the Steelers to the playoffs for the 5th straight season and to the AFC Central crown for the 3rd straight season. But early on, it did not go according to plan. As was to be expected, when the game started off, the defense was playing lights out. Like so many opponents before them, the Houston Oilers could not get anything going offensively. Houston finished the game with no points, 2 turnovers, and just 158 yards of total offense. The leading rusher on Houston had just 49 yards. Pittsburgh's defense once again did its job, and held the Oilers completely in check. It seemed like another one of those games where in order to win, all the Steelers had to do on the offensive side of the ball was literally anything. That was the good news for Pittsburgh. In front of a national television audience, in a must-win situation, the defense once again came to play, just as they had done many times before throughout the year and throughout the decade. The bad news was that Terry Bradshaw was looking terrible. He was not doing a good job under center commanding the offense. He was inaccurate, he was indecisive, and he looked incredibly rusty and like a guy that had no business being out on the field. Through the first 25 minutes of the game, the Steelers had yet to score a point. Through the first 6 possessions that the Steelers had in that stretch, they got into Houston territory 5 times, but walked away with a grand total of 0 points. Bradshaw started the day just 6 for 13 and was missing on quite a few throws. As Bradshaw said after the game on his first half performance, "My throwing wasn't anything like it should be. I just wasn't myself." And Noll, recognizing this and knowing what he had on the bench with Mike Kruczek, was not taking any chances. He couldn't afford to have Bradshaw screw up this opportunity to make the postseason and mess up what the defense had been doing. With that, Noll ordered Kruczek to warm up on the sidelines, get his helmet on, and get ready to go in the game. Just like that, Bradshaw thought his day was done, and maybe even that his time in Pittsburgh for that season at least was coming to an end. Bradshaw said on the whole ordeal, "I saw Coach Noll talking to Mike and I thought, well, that's it for me. I went over and gave Mike some encouragement, and I avoided Chuck." So what changed Noll's mind about no longer wanting to pull Terry Bradshaw? Oddly enough, it was a play that had nothing whatsoever to do with Terry Bradshaw. Roll the tape.
Robert Brazil, probably. Here's a little quick toss, intercepted by Mel Blount. 40, 35, 30, 25, 20, still going, and finally stopped. There's the big break of the ball game. That was a peculiar pass, a little lob.
Now you might be asking yourself a very valid question. Why the heck would this play have any impact whatsoever on Bradshaw's career and status for the rest of the game? This play was a defensive play by Mel Blount while Bradshaw was on the sideline with his helmet off and everything. Well, because the interception gave the Steelers the ball in incredible field position deep in Houston territory, Noll decided to give Bradshaw one more chance, since he was finally working with a short field. Had the drive ended any other way, such as a punt, or an Oilers score, or even an interception without the long run back, Kruczek is in the game. But because the Steelers had a short field, Noll left Bradshaw out there, not wanting to make any changes with a great field position. Sure enough, Bradshaw capitalized on the second chance seemingly out of nowhere. And to cap off the drive, as he had done many times before and many times after, Bradshaw found Lynn Swann for a 21-yard touchdown to give Pittsburgh their first points of the day and their first lead of the game. As a side note, if you want to learn more about the relationship between Terry Bradshaw and Lynn Swann, click the card in the upper right corner. Bradshaw got a stay in the game after that, and even scored another touchdown, this time with his legs after punching it in during the fourth quarter on a quarterback sneak from 1 yard out that officially iced the game. The Steelers won at 21-0, and while Bradshaw did not play great by any means, he played the full game and cemented himself as Pittsburgh's starter going into the postseason. And after the game, a lot of the talk was about why Bradshaw wasn't yanked, especially after the TV cameras very blatantly show Kruczek warming up. but Bradshaw wasn't complaining about being given this second life. Even though Bradshaw held no animosity towards Noll, saying that he understood the situation and why Noll was strongly considering making the change, when Bradshaw got to stay in, he said, "I appreciated it that he gave me one more chance. I wanted to prove something to myself that I could get something started." I think it's safe to say that after that performance, with a touchdown pass and a touchdown run to clinch the AFC Central title, he did just that. As it turned out, what Noll decided to do, or in this case, not to do, had lasting ramifications on the franchise not just for this season, but for the career of Terry Bradshaw. Bradshaw was now the starter for Pittsburgh going into the postseason. It was once again his team on offense. Noll jokingly said going into the postseason when asked about his team's passing game that the team didn't have a passing game, but it was clear that he was riding with Bradshaw just as he had done every other postseason. What followed was one of the greatest performances in the history of the playoffs by any quarterback. Again, Bradshaw finished that divisional round game with a perfect 158.3 passer rating. In the over 100-year history of the NFL, Bradshaw is one of just 3 quarterbacks to ever have a perfect passer rating in a playoff game, alongside Dallas Cowboys quarterback Don Meredith in the 1967 divisional against the Cleveland Browns, and Indianapolis Colts quarterback Peyton Manning in the 2003 wildcard against the Denver Broncos. Bradshaw was superb on this day, and he was so good that he might be responsible for literally saving the lives of hundreds of people at Memorial Stadium. That is not an exaggeration, but that could be a story for another video. As a side note, while I've talked about Bradshaw's best game, if you want to learn more about his worst game with the Steelers, click the card in the upper right corner. And obviously, you know the rest with Bradshaw and how great his career was past that point. He won 2 more Super Bowls, won an MVP, won 2 Super Bowl MVPs, made it to the All-1970s team, got a first-team All-Pro nomination, and got inducted into the Hall of Fame, where he is forever enshrined in canon. He is a Steelers legend in every sense of the word. But you have to wonder what the butterfly effect would have been if Noll pulled Bradshaw for Kruczek in the 1976 regular season finale. Yes, the Steelers still probably win that game. Again, all their offense had to do was breathe, and they would have been victorious. But what happens to Bradshaw? What happens if Kruczek starts the playoff game? What happens if Kruczek plays well and even takes the Steelers all the way to the Super Bowl? Remember, Kruczek was a second-round rookie that season. Who starts for the Steelers in 1977? Are Bradshaw's days numbered in Pittsburgh? It's crazy just how many scenarios and how many very real hypotheticals you can run through with something like this. Fortunately for Steeler fans, I'd say everything turned out alright for them at the end of the day. But to think the difference in Bradshaw being under center and being on the bench, or possibly an entirely different team in 1977 in the extreme scenario, had nothing to do with anything that Terry Bradshaw did. It had to do with an interception made by Mel Blount. If Blount doesn't pick that off, doesn't have the giant run back, and doesn't set the Steelers up in great field position, the Steelers dynasty of the 1970s, as well as the legacy of the great Terry Bradshaw, might be forever altered as we know it. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.